Finally sitting down and making time to experience Firewatch was something I wish I had done sooner, but I'm glad I didn't. I feel if I'd played this earlier on, then I would have missed so many key elements and symbolisms that made this game stick with me. I was a different person and had different interests 9 years ago, so I feel like this game wouldn't have had the same impact back then. But I played it recently, and this was my experience with Firewatch. The story begins with Henry spotting a beautiful woman called Julia, a woman he takes a chance on talking to on a night out, and while it doesn't go perfectly, they end up becoming an item. It continues to play out as the years go on. They move in together, get a dog, talk about kids and marriage, and this captures those beautiful moments of a relationship perfectly. Between these story moments, you have control over Henry, who is hiking as he makes his way deeper into the forest. And once it falls back into the narrative of learning about Henry and Julia's bond, it shows some cracks and hurdles that they work on to overcome. Like Julia takes a job 2,000 miles away and commutes back and forth a few times a year. Henry continues his hike as he looks to settle down for the night. While away, Julia has an episode where she forgets that she lent books to a colleague and believes that they were stolen from her. This episode has her sent home on paid leave. Julia and Henry seek professional help to understand, and all fingers are pointing to an early onset of dementia. At Henry's campfire, he looks through a journal of happy memories as the night sky creeps in. This forgetfulness becomes a consistent problem as she fails to remember her classes and why she's driving to a different town and is sent home on permanent medical leave. Some days she's the light that she's always been, and other days she's a stranger. Henry is at a crossroads. He could put her into a full-time care facility or take care of her himself. He chooses to take care of Julia. This impossibly difficult task leads to a line that says, "You can't do anything without her, and she can't do anything without you." Henry begins to drink often to cope with this stress, to take the edge off. He even ends up leaving to go to the bar where he unloads his burdens talking to a bartender, making it home in the early morning. One evening, Henry is stopped as he blows a .10 while driving under the influence, leading him to spend the night in jail. Julia's parents visit and see the state of the home and take Julia back with them. Henry doesn't fight back and accepts this with the promise to visit soon. He sees a job advertised and he takes it, to which Henry leaves his home to isolate himself away from the world, from his guilt, from the life that has fractured and crumbled around him. While it's easy to call out Henry for not doing the right thing by Julia, that's kind of the point. He's flawed, he makes mistakes and regrets them later. This fleshes out Henry's human error in the story of uncertainty in the decisions he has made. Henry's first interaction we see is when Delilah radios to say hi to the new person she'll be working with. She carries this bubbly curiosity mixed with a sarcastic humour that makes her seem rude as she asks what's wrong with you. She explains that people take this job to get away from something, so obviously she wants to know what led to Henry taking this job. They have this quick conversation with some slight awkward back and forth as Henry just wants to go to bed after his hike. Later down the line, she explains that she had been drinking and wasn't meaning to be insensitive. While this first interaction was awkward, they begin to get along better and develop a playful back and forth that highlights their personalities. Henry and Delilah have a very natural bond. Delilah understands why people take this job, and Henry realizes that this is the only person around to even hear him, regardless if he wants to share or not. Delilah becomes the norm as she charms her way into Henry's cold, shut-off character. Henry isn't really as cold or shut off as he might seem. Well, the Henry I played wasn't. I wasn't ashamed to speak of Julia and her condition. It's a sad truth that leads to Henry being here. He ran away and constantly regrets that choice as he mentions that he shouldn't be at Two Forks. He shouldn't be away from his life and Julia. Delilah is empathetic towards Henry and these decisions that he made. She doesn't push a sense of judgment on him for what he did or didn't do. She sees a person that made a call regardless of how difficult those circumstances are, and kept himself going in a way that best helped him. This caring nature begins to feel familiar and safe, a consistency that Henry hasn't felt for a while. The only consistent thing that was in Henry's recent memories was finding the bottom of a bottle to cope with what his life had devolved into. There's a late night call he has with Delilah while half asleep, which brings his grief to the centre stage, and Delilah sees this as something he might have needed, when a happy dream is more inviting than the harsh reality of what is. During the game, Delilah speaks of those who came before Henry, a father by the name of Ned Goodwin, who suffered with PTSD, who decided to bring his son Brian to work. Ned's mother was the sole caretaker of Brian, and after she passes, Ned was the only next of kin. Ned wasn't much of a talker from Delilah's description, but she spoke to Brian for a brief time that they worked there. After some time, Ned and Brian chose to leave Two Forks Lookout. This kind of displays the fact that Delilah does try to make an effort to talk with people she works with. While talking on the radio all day might not be a thing they have to do, it clearly shows that Henry and Delilah enjoy speaking to one another, as they build chemistry together. On Henry's first day, he stumbles across two girls who are drinking, blasting music and skinny dipping. He stomps out their campfire and tells them what they're doing is illegal from across the lake, before they run away while hurling insults his way. On his way back, he spots a figure shining a light down on him, before running away. As Henry makes his way back, he finds his typewriter at the bottom of the tower that had been thrown from inside his watch point. When he investigates, he discovers someone has taken his bedding and vandalized everything. The next day you find that the phone lines are down, and when you finally find a damaged location, you see that they've been cut. You find beer cans scattered across the floor and piece together that it was the girls from the lake. Delilah tells you to go scare the girls to teach them a lesson, so as you track them down you find their camp, which had been mauled through and destroyed, to which you find your bedding. These teen girls stealing your stuff and destroying the phone lines and your room seems like an overreaction for being told off, but teens have done worse for less. One evening, Henry and Delilah sit up watching a fire that's formed in the forest. They decide to name it the June Fire after Delilah's middle name. The tone starts to change up, as odd things start happening from here on out. Henry ends up finding a notepad with his and Delilah's conversation scribbled down from the previous night, and on further investigation he finds a walkie-talkie, moments after Henry is knocked unconscious. Upon waking up, Henry and Delilah begin to try and solve what's going on. This investigation takes you to Wapiti Meadow, which has been fenced off and requires something heavy duty to break the lock, to which you find yourself an axe. There's a brief moment where Henry and Delilah hear a cough that isn't either of them, to which they begin to freak out and come to the conclusion that they're being observed and recorded for one reason or another. Delilah takes this as the point that they need to make a new form of safe communication, and tells Henry to stay in the tower and she will contact him. The next morning, through some chipper and delightful subtle hints, she tells Henry where he needs to go to pick up a new radio. Once this communication is made, they both fully fall into the rabbit hole of conspiracy, and panic as they try to figure out what could be happening, and why, and all fingers are pointing to Wapiti Station. Henry breaks into the fenced-off location, and finds a tent with a tracker, files and paperwork keeping detailed records on both him and Delilah, which sends them both into a panic. He ends up taking the paperwork and the tracker with him. In a moment of anger, Delilah says you should burn it down so they can't monitor you anymore, which Henry responds with the grass being dry and would go up in seconds. As Henry goes to leave, some rocks fall down and smoke begins to emit from the camp as a fire started. The tracker begins to beep, so you head out to investigate, to which you stumble upon a backpack that has a key to a locked-off cave system. When heading back, Delilah mentions you are home, so you should have a drink, and this alarms Henry as he sprints back to the Firewatch. Upon arriving, he finds a cassette player sellotaped to the door of a recording of Delilah and him talking about setting the Wapiti camp on fire. The following day, Henry ventures into the cave, working his way deeper in, and that's when he finally sees it. Left to decay away deep in a cave after a terrible fall. Brian Goodwin. This dark truth that Brian was here all these years strikes hard when you give Delilah the news, as she feels she could have done something. But what happened to Brian? The final day comes and the June and Wapiti station fire have merged, becoming out of control and requiring all Firewatch staff to be evacuated. The tracker begins to beep and you choose to follow it and see if you can find one last answer to all that has been going on. The tracker leads you to a rope with a tape attached. As you press play on the cassette, you're met with the voice of Ned Goodwin as you ascend the rope. Discovering Ned's bunker at the top, you find out that it was just him. He had vandalized everything, was listening over the radio, making notes and setting the Wapiti station on fire to cover his tracks and create the illusion of strange things going on. No conspiracy, no secret social experiment, just a broken man keeping tabs on the surrounding area. After the loss of Brian, he couldn't bear the consequences, so he hid out in the forest and logged interactions he heard over the radio. His recording tells you he didn't kill Brian. It was an accident due to Brian not sinking his anchor correctly into the wall when climbing. Delilah, while going through her own difficulties as she feels responsible for Brian's death, becomes cold, not in a bitter or harsh way, but absent. This meaningful connection Henry made with her, this security and safety to speak his mind freely without feeling judged, now feels lost and strained. The end scenes you run through the forest as the fire stains all that its light touches, a powerful moment that displays unstoppable chaos before you. I found it to be an impactful story that represents how things are out of our hands, that we can't plan for everything that happens, and the saddening realization of what life can be. From the choices I made, I tried to be there for Julia regardless of how difficult the task was. It went from specks of annoyances to a whirlwind of disaster completely out of Henry's control, much like that of the forest fire that engulfed his life. The somber music that plays at the end drives home that devastation that is swirling around you. This presents the player with an audio representation of everything you see, sinking in the smoke and the fire as you make the journey to the evacuation alone. The final moments of the game refuse to give you closure, as Henry sits alone in Delilah's lookout, so close yet so far from her, as she took the rescue helicopter while you made your way to her. While you wait for the helicopter to circle back, you call Delilah on the radio, and they share this brave-faced conversation about what they want to do next, while avoiding the fact that they wanted to be in each other's presence. This saddening outcome feels like you're robbed of the chance to connect. I've seen people say that the ending feels unfinished, but I kind of think that's the point. It leaves you with a free canvas to create whatever future we hope for Henry. Be that making things right by Julia, moving on from what his life was, or sinking back to the bottom of a bottle to numb the pain. Life doesn't just get fixed without effort, and Henry started this game with a heavy burden, something that didn't just disappear because he ran away. Grief is a powerful emotion that leads to people making dumb decisions or trying to survive any way they can. Some turn to friends and family for support, some bear it alone in isolation, and some turn to drinking and indulging in substances to take the sting out of the pain. Firewatch was a short game, but it made me think about how life can spin on itself, leaving us flawed creatures to make decisions that carry so much weight, without knowing if they're the right or wrong answer. While a saddening story to experience and feel, it was such a beautiful journey to take. Anyway, I hope you have a lovely day and or evening, and I'll catch you next time.